Victoria Harrington slammed both palms flat on the conference table so hard that 3 senior executives flinched backward in their chairs. Pull the entire acquisition. Tonight. Every dollar. Done. The room went silent. $40 million. Gone. Because of a feeling she couldn't explain. But none of that mattered the moment her phone buzzed. One photo, sent by her bodyguard from the hotel lobby downstairs. Her daughter, the little girl who hadn't spoken a complete sentence to anyone in 14 months, was sitting beside a complete stranger whispering something into his ear and smiling. Drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if something in this hits you, subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The first thing people noticed about Victoria Harrington when she walked into a room was not her tailored coat, or the precise way she moved, or the fact that she was worth somewhere north of $3 billion, depending on which quarter you asked. The first thing they noticed was that she never looked uncertain. Not once. Not in boardrooms. Not in courtrooms. Not in the kind of high-stakes negotiations where grown men came in confident and left pale and quiet, wondering how she had seen the exit before they even found the door. Victoria Harrington, at 41 years old, was the kind of woman who made decisions the way other people breathed fast, instinctive, and without apology. But on a Thursday afternoon in late October, standing in the middle of a hotel lobby in downtown Chicago with her phone in her hand and her heart somewhere near the floor, Victoria Harrington had absolutely no idea what to do, because her daughter was laughing. Amelia, 7 years old, brown pigtails, one missing front tooth, the girl who had not laughed out loud in front of another human being in 14 months, was sitting on a bench near the lobby window, with her knees pulled up to her chest, her little notebook open across her lap, and she was laughing. Quietly, carefully, like she was testing the sound and making sure it was safe, but laughing. And next to her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, was a man Victoria had never seen before in her life. How was big. Not in the polished, gym-sculpted way of the executive crowd Victoria moved through every day. Big the way a person gets from actual physical work. Wide shoulders, hands that looked like they'd built things and carried things, and maybe at some point fought things. He wore a faded canvas jacket with a construction company logo on the chest work boots that had seen real mud, and he had the kind of face that belonged to a man in his mid-30s who had lived about 20 years more than that in terms of what he'd seen. I wasn't looking at Amelia like she was fascinating. He wasn't looking at her the way every therapist and specialist and well-meaning family friend had looked at her for the past 14 months, like she was a puzzle, like she was a problem, like if they could just find the right angle, they could finally get inside and fix whatever had broken. He was just looking at her notebook, like it was the most interesting thing he'd seen all week. Victoria stopped walking. She stood there 12 feet away, and she watched. 14 months ago, Amelia Harrington had been the loudest child in any room she entered. That was not an exaggeration. Victoria had video of it on her phone, home videos from before, the kind she couldn't bring herself to delete, but also couldn't quite bring herself to watch without that particular silence settling into her chest. Videos of Amelia singing made-up songs at the kitchen counter while the housekeeper laughed. Amelia explaining in absolute seriousness that the backyard needed a fountain and a drawbridge. Amelia at her first-grade classroom winter concert, not singing the words the teacher had taught, but clearly singing something of her own invention with complete confidence. Her daughter had been a person who walked into the world like she owned it. And then came the incident at Claremont Academy. Victoria had reconstructed it from teacher reports, from what other parents said, from what the school counselor described in careful clinical language that somehow made it worse. A group of girls, the kind of social architecture that forms among 7-year-olds with shocking precision and cruelty, had decided that Amelia's ideas were strange. Her drawings were weird. Her obsession with buildings and cities and structures was odd. They'd said so loudly in front of everyone at the worst possible moment. And one of them, the ringleader, a girl named Priya, whose mother Victoria had met at 3 separate charity functions, had taken Amelia's notebook. The notebook where she kept all her imaginary cities, and had read pieces of it out loud in a mocking voice. Amelia had stood there. She hadn't cried. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't fought back. She had simply gone very, very quiet. And she'd stayed that way. The pediatric psychologist used the phrase selective mutism, presenting as social withdrawal. The child therapist talked about trauma-informed approaches and building trust over time. The specialist Victoria flew in from Boston, talked about rebuilding the child's relationship with self-expression. Victoria had paid all of them. She had followed every recommendation. She had restructured her schedule, which was not a small thing, restructuring the schedule of a woman who ran 4 companies across 2 time zones to make sure Amelia had continuity, consistency, safety. Amelia had gotten quieter. Not dramatically. Not in a way that set off alarm bells every morning. She still ate. She still slept. She still went to school, a different school, now smaller, gentler. She still did her drawings. She just stopped sharing them. She stopped talking to people she didn't absolutely have to talk to. She stopped asking questions of strangers. She stopped filling rooms. And Victoria, who could negotiate billion-dollar acquisitions and outmaneuver men twice her age, and experience could not figure out how to reach her own daughter. She'd tried everything she knew how to do. She'd tried talking. She'd tried not talking. She'd tried special trips, a weekend in New York, a week in Paris, the kind of things a 7-year-old was supposed to find magical. Amelia had been polite and quiet and fine during all of it. Just fine. The word fine had become the most devastating word in Victoria's vocabulary. She'd tried patience. She'd tried structure. She'd tried giving Amelia more space and less space and different space. She'd read books about childhood trauma and parental communication and the neuroscience of emotional safety. None of it had worked. And Victoria, alone in her penthouse apartment on too many Wednesday nights when the city was quiet and Amelia was asleep, had started to wonder if there was something fundamentally broken about her. Not Amelia, but her, that made her unable to give her own child what she needed. That was the thing she never said out loud to anyone. Not to her assistant. Not to her attorney and oldest friend Diane. Not to the 3 different therapists she'd consulted for herself during this same period. Not even in the journal she'd started and abandoned after 6 entries. She thought it constantly. She said it to no one. They were in Chicago because of the Meridian Tower project. Victoria's development company was in the final stages of acquiring a parcel of commercial real estate on the lakefront, and there were meetings that required her physical presence, the kind where lawyers needed to see your face and shake your hand and convince themselves they were dealing with a real person who could be trusted. She'd brought Amelia because the alternative was leaving her with the nanny in a Manhattan apartment for 4 days, which Amelia didn't like, or leaving her with Victoria's mother in Connecticut, which Victoria didn't like for reasons she would have needed another hour to fully explain. So Amelia had come. She'd sat in the back of the car reading. She'd eaten breakfast in the hotel restaurant with a courtesy that still 14 months in broke Victoria's heart a little. The way her daughter remembered to say please and thank you to every waiter with such careful, deliberate politeness, like she was performing a task she'd been assigned rather than just being a kid. The meetings had run long. They always ran long. Victoria had arranged for Amelia to wait in the hotel lobby with Marcus, her head of security, who was good at his job and completely terrible at talking to children. Marcus knew this about himself. He'd warned Victoria. She'd told him Amelia didn't really need conversation, just someone nearby. She was supposed to be back in 90 minutes. She'd been gone for 3 hours. And now she was standing 12 feet away, watching her silent daughter laugh quietly at something a stranger was showing her in the margin of her notebook. Victoria did not move for a long moment. She watched. The man said something. She couldn't hear it from where she stood, but she could see the shape of it, low, unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't need to prove anything. Amelia looked down at her notebook, then up at him and said something back. A full sentence. Victoria could see the movement of it on her daughter's lips, the way her face opened slightly like a door that had been stuck, finally giving way just a fraction of an inch. The man nodded. Not like she'd said something amazing. Not like she'd done something remarkable that required acknowledging. Just nodded. Like what she'd said made sense and he'd filed it away and now they could keep going. Like she was just a person he was having a conversation with. Marcus appeared at Victoria's elbow. He'd spotted her the moment she walked in. She started talking to him about 20 minutes ago, Marcus said quietly. He sat down on the bench because his phone call ran out of battery. She was drawing. He looked at the drawing. I was right there. He didn't approach her. She spoke to him first. Victoria looked at Marcus. She spoke to him first. Yes, ma'am. What did she say? Marcus hesitated, which was not something Marcus did often. She said she was working on a problem with a bridge and asked if he knew anything about how bridges were built. Victoria looked back at the man on the bench. He was pointing at something in Amelia's notebook, now tracing a line with his finger, and Amelia was leaning forward to see what he meant. Victoria's throat did something she hadn't been expecting. She swallowed. She walked toward them. Amelia saw her first. And here was the moment Victoria had braced for, without fully knowing she'd been bracing for it the way her daughter would go. Careful again, the conversation closing like a window before a storm, the return to that gentle, managed distance. But Amelia did something different. She said, "Mom, look at this." She held up the notebook. Victoria stopped. She looked at the page. Amelia had drawn a suspension bridge, not a child's approximation, but something that showed real observation, real attention to how the cables connected to the towers, how the deck was supported. In the margin in handwriting that was clearly adult and not her daughter's, there were a few notes. Measurements, small sketched corrections where the tension ratios were off. He knew about the cables, Amelia said, the way they have to distribute the weight. Victoria looked at the man. He stood up when she approached, not in a formal way, just the automatic consideration of someone raised with old manners. He was taller than she'd realized from across the lobby. He met her eyes without flinching, which people sometimes didn't do, and there was nothing in his expression that read as impressed by who she was, or nervous about who she was. He just looked like a man who had been having a conversation and was now including another person in it. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, "Caleb Whitmore, your daughter has a real eye for load distribution. Most adults can't see the problem she spotted in 20 minutes. Victoria looked at him for a moment. "You know who I am. The concierge mentioned it when I came in. I was doing a site inspection on the renovation 2 blocks over." He glanced at Amelia, then back. "She spoke to me. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't trying to engage her. She was sitting there and she asked me a question. About bridges. About whether a bridge could be built wide enough to have parks on it. I said that had actually been done. She wanted to know how." He paused. "I told her." Victoria looked at her daughter. Amelia was watching this exchange with an alertness that was almost painful to see the way she tracked it, ready for some shift in the air that would make it end. "I'm aware," Victoria said carefully, "that you weren't doing anything wrong." "Good," Caleb said, simply, without relief or defensiveness. And she didn't know exactly what it was about that single word, just good, just clean and level, and without any need for her validation, but it caught her somewhere she hadn't expected. She held out her hand. "Victoria." He shook it. Firm brief, no performance. "I know," he said. She meant to say goodbye. She meant to thank him and move on and take Amelia upstairs for dinner, which was late already, and deal with the 12 emails she hadn't answered, and the call with Tokyo that had been pushed twice. She didn't. Instead, she found herself sitting down on the other end of the bench, her coat still on her phone in her bag for once, and saying to Caleb Whitmore, "What did you tell her about the cables?" He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted just slightly, in a way she couldn't quite read. Then he reached over and picked up Amelia's notebook. "Your daughter designed a bridge that would need to hold about 3 times the weight she allocated to the main cables," he said. "I showed her how the math worked. She corrected a mistake I made in the arithmetic." Victoria looked at Amelia. Amelia looked at the ground, but her mouth was doing the thing, the small, involuntary thing that used to be her default expression and had become rare enough to notice. The beginning of a smile she wasn't quite ready to own yet. "She's always done the math in her head," Victoria said. "I noticed. Her teachers think it's—" She stopped, reconsidered. "They find it unusual." "It is unusual," Caleb said. "That's not a problem." He said it without emphasis, without making it a lesson, without performing sensitivity. He said it the way you'd state that the sky was currently gray, factual, settled, and not requiring anyone's agreement. Victoria studied him for a moment. "What kind of construction?" she asked. "Commercial, some civil. I run a crew mostly restoration and new build on mid-rise structures. Chicago's a good city for it." He paused. "You're here for the Meridian parcel." Word travels. Construction industry in this city isn't that big. When somebody's moving on lakefront, commercial people here. Victoria nodded. "How long have you been in Chicago?" 3 years. Before that, I was in the service." He said it flatly, without the particular pride or particular weight that usually came with that kind of statement. Just information. Military Navy, did 12 years. She waited for more. He didn't offer it. Amelia, who had been very still and very attentive during this conversation, looked up at Caleb and said, "Did you build things in the Navy?" "Some," he said. "Mostly I broke things." Amelia considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "For a reason." "Yeah," he said. "For a reason." "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied, and looked back at her notebook. Victoria watched her daughter make a small correction to the bridge drawing, unhurried, sure of herself, and felt something in her chest that she hadn't felt in 14 months. She didn't have a name for it, but it was the opposite of helpless. She did not ask him to stay. What happened was more accidental than that, which was perhaps why it worked. Victoria's assistant called to say the Tokyo meeting had been moved up and would now take place in 40 minutes from Victoria's hotel suite. Amelia heard this, and something in her face did the familiar closing movement, the slight tightening, the return to careful distance. The daughter who understood perfectly well what meeting meant in terms of where her mother's attention was going. And Caleb Whitmore, who had no reason to do anything except pick up his phone and leave, said to Amelia, "You've got the tension wrong on the west cable in your revision. You want to fix that before your mom's call is done." Amelia looked at the notebook. She looked at him. "It'll take a while," she said. "I don't have anywhere to be until 7, he said. It wasn't an offer that required Victoria's approval. It was a statement of availability directed entirely at Amelia, which left Victoria in the interesting position of being either the person who said yes or the person who said no. She said, "Marcus is here." Caleb glanced at Marcus, who was standing 8 feet away, and had the expression of a man who was professionally neutral about everything and had been doing so for 11 years. "Works for me," Caleb said. Victoria looked at her daughter. Amelia was already turning back to the notebook. Victoria went upstairs. The Tokyo call lasted 63 minutes. She was aware of every one of them. When she came back down, Amelia was still on the bench, still talking. Caleb was leaning back now, arms crossed, listening to something her daughter was explaining at length about why the imaginary city in her notebook needed a second river. Victoria stood at the edge of the lobby and watched for 30 seconds before either of them noticed her. In those 30 seconds, she counted 4 things. Amelia gestured twice. She'd stopped gesturing when she talked months ago. The therapist had noted it in an assessment report, the way withdrawal often flattened physical expression. Amelia interrupted herself to correct a detail she'd gotten wrong. She used to do that constantly, catch herself mid-sentence and insist on precision. She'd stopped doing it. Amelia laughed once, short and genuine, at something Caleb said. Not a polite laugh, an actual one. And when Caleb responded to whatever she'd said about the river, Amelia leaned forward toward him, not a way to see what he was pointing at. 4 things. 14 months of every professional, every specialist, every carefully calibrated therapeutic intervention, and a stranger in a canvas jacket had produced 4 things in 3 hours. Victoria Harrington, who did not cry in lobbies or anywhere else if she could help it, pressed her thumbnail against her palm and breathed. Then she walked over. Caleb saw her coming. He stood up. "She's got a solid design," he said. "Needs to work out the water table issue, but that's advanced for her age." "Water table," Victoria repeated. "The second river." He picked up his jacket from the arm of the bench. "She's planning to divert it, which is ambitious. I told her to research how Rotterdam manages drainage. She said she'd look it up." Victoria looked at Amelia. "I'm going to look it up," Amelia confirmed with calm conviction. "Okay," Victoria said. She looked at Caleb. He was pulling on his jacket, getting ready to leave, no ceremony, no expectation of acknowledgement. "Mr. Whitmore." He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. "She did the work," he said. "I just knew about the cables." And he left. Victoria sat down next to her daughter on the bench. Amelia was looking at the notebook. Then she looked at the door where Caleb had gone, and she said without drama, without weight, in the voice of someone who simply noticed something true and decided to say it, "He didn't ask me why I don't talk very much." Victoria kept her voice very steady. "No, he didn't." "Everyone else asks," Amelia said. "Or they try not to ask, and I can tell they're trying not to ask." She paused. "He just wanted to talk about the bridge." "I know," Victoria said. Amelia looked at the notebook again. She turned to a new page. She started drawing. That night alone in the hotel suite after Amelia was asleep, Victoria did something she almost never did. She sat without working. She sat at the window with Chicago below her, and she thought about the afternoon. Not strategically, not analytically, Not in terms of what it meant or what to do next. She just sat with it. A man who didn't try to fix her daughter had reached her in 3 hours, and Victoria kept coming back to the same question, turning it over, the way you turn something over, when you can feel the answer on the other side, but haven't gotten your grip right yet. What had she been doing wrong? Not the therapists, not the schools, not the strategies. Her. What had she been doing wrong? She picked up her phone. She opened the search bar. She typed Caleb Whitmore, Chicago, construction. The results were sparse: a company registration, a profile on a contractor licensing site, a name in a local industry newsletter from 2 years ago, listed as the site supervisor on a restoration project in Pilsen that had won a preservation award. She went to the licensing site. How was licensed in Illinois and 3 other states. His company, Whitmore Structural, had been registered 3 years ago. Before that, nothing. The military record was what it was. She couldn't access the parts that mattered. She put the phone down. She looked out the window. She thought about what it would have cost her in dollars to find someone who knew about load distribution and cable tension and Rotterdam drainage systems, someone who could have sat on a bench and talked to her daughter about bridges for 3 hours. She could have found that person. She could have found 20 of them. She had the resources, the connections, the capacity to build any environment she wanted around Amelia. But the thing that had worked today hadn't been expertise. It had been something else. It had been a man who looked at her daughter and simply saw a person with an interesting problem, who didn't have a clinical lens or an agenda or a theory about what was wrong or what would fix it, who just sat down and talked about cables. Victoria leaned her head back against the chair. She did not sleep for a long time. The next morning, Victoria Harrington had a 7:30 breakfast meeting with 2 senior attorneys and a real estate broker who had been circling the Meridian deal like expensive, well-dressed sharks. She arrived 4 minutes early. Somewhere across the city on a construction site 2 blocks from the hotel, Caleb Whitmore was already on a roof at 6:45, looking at a structural problem that hadn't been in the original plans. Neither of them knew that morning that the day before had changed anything. It had changed everything. The billionaire who controlled billion-dollar deals couldn't reach her daughter. The soldier who'd survived things he couldn't talk about had reached her in an afternoon. And Amelia, 7 years old, brown pigtails, 1 missing front tooth, had asked him not to go. Just before Victoria had come back down to the lobby, just before the world shifted. Her daughter had looked at the man with the quiet voice and the work jacket and the knowledge of cable tensions, and she had said, "Can you stay until my mom comes back?" For the first time in 14 months, she had asked someone not to leave. And that small, quiet sentence, barely 10 words, was already beginning to break something open that no amount of money had ever been able to touch. Victoria Harrington did not make impulsive decisions. That was not arrogance. It was just fact. The same way it was fact that she was left-handed, that she took her coffee black, that she had not taken a vacation longer than 4 days in 11 years. She was a person who gathered information, assessed it, and moved with intention. Every major decision she had ever made in business, and there had been hundreds of them. Some of them the kind that altered careers and companies, and occasionally entire market sectors, had been preceded by a period of careful, deliberate analysis. So she told herself that what she did the following morning had nothing impulsive about it. She simply asked the hotel concierge which construction site was 2 blocks north, and then she walked there. It was 6:50 in the morning. Amelia was still asleep. Marcus was outside the suite door. The city was doing that thing it did in early autumn, when the lake pushed cold air through the streets and the light came in sideways and sharp, and Chicago looked like a city that had decided to be serious about itself for a few hours before the day complicated everything. The site was behind a chain-link fence with a temporary plywood barrier along the sidewalk. She could hear it before she saw it, the controlled noise of early work equipment, moving voices, carrying the specific authority of men who'd been doing this long enough that they didn't need to raise them. She stood at the fence line. A man in a hard hat and a canvas jacket was standing on a raised platform near the building's second-floor framing, looking at something on a tablet, talking to someone beside him. He pointed at a section of the wall. The other man nodded and moved. The man with the tablet made a mark, then handed it off and climbed down the ladder on the side of the platform with the ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Caleb Whitmore hit the ground, turned, and saw her standing at the fence. He did not look surprised exactly. He looked like a man who filed new information quickly and moved on. He crossed the site in a straight line, unhurried, and stopped on the other side of the fence from her. "Mrs. Harrington?" "Victoria," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Victoria." "I came to say something," she said, "and I wasn't sure I could do it properly through a hotel concierge." Something shifted in the corner of his expression. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. "Okay. Whatever you did yesterday." She stopped, recalibrated. "What I mean is Amelia talked at dinner last night. Not to me exactly. She talked about Rotterdam's drainage system. She'd looked it up on her tablet, and she gave me a full explanation of how the city manages water infrastructure, which she then connected to the design problem with her imaginary city's second river. She talked for 40 minutes. I timed it." Caleb looked at her. "She hasn't done that in over a year," Victoria said. "Not like that. Not just talking because she had something to say and felt like saying it." She held his gaze. "So I came to tell you that, because you should know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She figured out the drainage problem herself. I just told her Rotterdam existed." "I'm aware you're going to say that. I'm saying it because it's true." "I know it's true." Victoria kept her voice level. "I'm saying that whatever you did or didn't do to make her feel safe enough to care about Rotterdam's drainage system. I've spent 14 months trying to produce that result with significantly more resources and significantly less success." She paused. "And I'm standing here at 6:50 in the morning in front of a construction site because I don't entirely know what to do with that information, and I thought perhaps I should start by being honest about it." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. There was something in the way he looked at her, not assessing, not impressed, not performing anything, that reminded her of the way he'd looked at Amelia, like he was just receiving the information without deciding in advance what shape it needed to be. "My daughter went through something similar," he said. "Not the same, but similar." Victoria hadn't expected that. "Your daughter, Olivia, she's 8. She went through a period of about a year where she pulled back from everything. Different reasons than Amelia, but the same shape." He glanced at the site behind him for a moment, then back. "I spent 6 months trying to fix it. Took her to specialists, restructured her schedule, read every book I could find. Made it worse, actually. She felt like a project." "What changed?" I thought about that for a moment. "I stopped trying to fix it. I just started being around, talking about things that had nothing to do with her not talking, doing things with her that were about something else, building things mostly. She likes to build things." Victoria watched him. "And she recovered. She found her way back." "Yeah." He paused. "It wasn't fast, and I made a lot of mistakes in the middle, but the thing that helped most was probably when I stopped making her feel like her silence was a problem I was trying to solve." Victoria looked at the ground for a moment. When she looked up, she said, "How does a person stop doing that when they're terrified?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. She appreciated that. She'd come to distrust people who answered immediately. "You figure out what you're actually afraid of," he said. "Usually it's not what you think it is." "And what do you think I'm afraid of?" He looked at her with an evenness that had nothing challenging in it. "I don't know you well enough to answer that. That's a diplomatic response. It's an honest one." He shifted his weight slightly. "I've known you for about 4 hours total." "Fair." She looked at him. "But you have a theory." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile still, but adjacent to one. "I have an observation. I'll take it. You're a woman who's very good at solving problems," he said. "Probably because for a long time solving the problem was the thing that made you feel like you had control. And somewhere along the way, Amelia stopped being solvable. And that's not just painful, it's disorienting. Because if you can't solve the thing that matters most, what does that say about the skill you've built your whole life around?" The site was making noise behind him. Someone called his name from across the yard. He didn't turn. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You got that from 4 hours," she said. "I got it from watching you stand in the lobby for 3 minutes before you walked over to us." She hadn't known he'd seen that. Something settled in her that was not quite comfort. It was more like the feeling of a thing being named that you'd been carrying without a name for too long. She said, "I have a breakfast meeting in 40 minutes. I have a wall to inspect in 10. They looked at each other. "Would your daughter," Victoria said, "want to come to the Chicago Architecture Museum with Amelia on Saturday? I have a meeting in the morning, but I'm free by noon. Amelia has been asking about it since we arrived." Caleb considered her for a moment. Olivia's with me this week. So is that a yes? He looked at her steadily. That's a yes. She nodded. Good. She turned and walked back up the block. She didn't look back because she was not the kind of woman who looked back, but she was aware with an acuity that had nothing to do with business of the fact that she wanted to. She filed that away and kept walking. Caleb Whitmore had not planned to still be in Chicago in 3 weeks. That was the first thing that changed. The project, a mid-rise restoration on the near north side, had run into a structural issue that wasn't in the original survey. A section of the load-bearing interior wall on the 3rd and 4th floors had been modified at some point in the building's history without proper documentation, which meant the entire remediation plan had to be reconceived from scratch. His structural engineer was good, but needed time. The general contractor was pushing. The building owner was managing that specific brand of panic that wealthy people develop when a project they've invested in begins to reveal complexity they hadn't priced into their expectations. Caleb was used to this. Construction projects always revealed themselves eventually. You planned for it as well as you could, and then when it happened, and it always happened, you adapted. He stayed. He told Olivia, who was with her aunt in Evanston during the week, that he'd be in Chicago through at least the end of the month. Olivia said okay. She usually said okay. She was 8 years old and had spent enough of her life watching her father adapt to things that it had stopped requiring explanation. That thought was one he kept tucked away in a place he didn't visit very often. Saturday arrived. The Chicago Architecture Museum was the kind of place Caleb would have found mildly interesting on his own, and that became genuinely absorbing the moment 2 children got involved. Olivia, who was compact and dark-haired and had her father's quality of receiving information with focused attention before responding, had walked into the entry hall, looked at the scale models along the central corridor and said, "Is that the Sears Tower?" with an exactitude that suggested she already knew the answer and was testing the quality of the exhibit's accuracy. Amelia had grabbed her arm. Not tentatively, not with the careful, measured movements of a child who'd learned to read a room before touching anything in it. She grabbed Olivia's arm and said, "That one's wrong," pointing to a detail on the scale model of the Willis Tower. "The antenna placement is off." And Olivia had looked at it head tilted and said, "How do you know?" "I looked it up," Amelia said. And that was that. They were off. Caleb and Victoria stood 2 paces behind and slightly to the left of each other, watching the girls move through the exhibit with the focused intensity of 2 people who had found someone else who spoke their language. "She grabbed her arm," Victoria said. "Yeah," Caleb said. "She hasn't touched anyone other than me voluntarily in 8 months." Caleb nodded but didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to add. It had happened. It meant something. Adding words to it would just get in the way. Victoria watched Amelia point at something on a display board, explaining something to Olivia, with both hands moving the kind of gesture that came from the center of a person rather than the practiced edge of it. She said very quietly, "I keep waiting for it to go away." Caleb looked at her. "What do you mean?" "This." She gestured slightly toward the girls. "The openness. I keep waiting for her to close up again. Every time she does something like this, talks at dinner, makes a friend, uses her hands when she's explaining something, I'm tracking it. And there's this voice in the back of my head that says, it's temporary. That tomorrow she'll be back to being careful and quiet, and I'll have gotten my hopes up for nothing." Caleb thought about that. "You're managing your own expectations." "Or I'm terrified," she said. She said it without any particular drama, just plainly the way she had outside the construction site. He'd noticed that about her, that she was better at directness than most people gave her credit for when she chose it. "Probably both," he said. She looked at him. A short, dry sound came out of her, almost a laugh. "You're not going to tell me to think positive?" "No." "Good. I hate that." "Being afraid she'll close up again doesn't mean she will," he said. "It just means you're paying attention, which she needs." He paused. "What would actually help is if the fear didn't turn into watching. She can feel being watched. They always can." Victoria was quiet. Ahead of them, Amelia was showing Olivia something in her notebook. Olivia was reading it with the kind of focused attention that was already a mirror of her father's. "How do you stop watching?" Victoria asked. "You find something else to be in the room about." She looked at him. He lifted one shoulder slightly. "You have things that interest you, things outside of her, Be interested in those things when you're around her, not performing actually. She'll feel the difference. You sound like you learned that the hard way. Most things that are true, I learned that way. She turned back toward the exhibit. What did you do when Olivia went through her year? He walked a few steps to stay level with the girls who had moved to the next display. I built things. In the apartment, I mean. I was doing renovation work and I'd come home and I'd work on things in the apartment, small projects, nothing dramatic. Olivia started watching. Then she started asking. Then she started handing me things. Then one day she was holding one end of something while I held the other, and she just started talking. Not about what had happened to her, just talking. Victoria listened. I think she needed to be beside me, he said. Not facing me, beside me. There's a difference. Victoria looked at the side of his face for a moment. She thought about Amelia on the bench, not facing the world, but sitting beside a man who happened to know about cables. Besides, she said, yes, kids don't always come back through the front door, Caleb said. Sometimes they find a side door you didn't know was there. You've got to be okay with not knowing which one it's going to be. She absorbed that. Ahead, Olivia had taken out a pencil where she'd produced a pencil from was unclear, but Caleb did not appear surprised by this, and was making a small correction to something in Amelia's notebook. Amelia watched this with a focused, evaluating look that Caleb recognized because his daughter wore it too, the face of a person deciding whether they agreed with an edit. Amelia nodded. Olivia wrote something else. They kept going. They got coffee while the girls stayed with the architectural models Marcus positioned nearby. The museum cafe was not impressive, but the coffee was serviceable, and they sat across from each other at a small table near the window, and Victoria asked him something she'd been holding since the construction site. What branch of the Navy? SEALs, he said. 12 years. You left. I did. After something specific. He looked at her steadily. After something specific. She registered that the answer was complete. She didn't push. She'd learned by this point that Caleb Whitmore gave information in the amount it was useful, and not more, which was a quality she respected even when it frustrated her. Do you miss it? She asked instead. He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. People usually answered that question reflexively. I miss the clarity, he said. Out there you knew what the problem was. You knew your job. You knew who was standing beside you and what they'd do. He turned the coffee cup slightly on the table. Civilian life is, there are a lot more variables, and people are a lot harder to read. You read me in 4 hours, she said. I read one thing about you in 4 hours, he said, and I might have been wrong. You weren't. Then I got lucky. She smiled briefly. People who are consistently lucky are usually also consistently observant. He looked at her. Is that from a book? From experience. He made a small sound that was the version of a laugh he seemed to have contained, genuine, not performed. She was starting to recognize it. How long were you married? He asked. 8 years. Amelia's father. We divorced when she was 4. She said it clean, no edge on it. He's a good person. We were better at being ambitious in the same direction than we were at being in a life together. He's in London now. He sees Amelia in summer calls twice a week. She loves him. It works. And you? I work, she said. I'm quite good at it. I know. He paused. What do you do that isn't work? She opened her mouth. She closed it. He watched her not find the answer. That's a real question, he said, not unkindly. I know it's a real question, she said. I'm trying to answer it honestly. She considered. I read. When I have time, which is less often than I intend. I used to run. I haven't in about a year. She paused. I used to take Amelia to museums. Before. She said the last word, and the weight of it was very specific. Before, he said. Before things got careful, she said. When she was still, when everything was still easy. She looked down at the table for a moment. I keep thinking about this one afternoon, maybe 6 months before the incident at school. We were at the Natural History Museum in New York. She must have been 6.5, and she talked to a docent for about 20 minutes about whether dinosaurs had understood architecture, completely serious. The docent played along. She shook her head slightly. She was so present, so herself, so unafraid of what anyone thought of her. She stopped. Caleb didn't fill the silence with something comforting. He just let it be what it was. She'll get there again, he said finally. You can't know that. No, he said. I can't. He paused. But what I saw this morning with Olivia, that wasn't a performance. Kids can't sustain performances. What you saw was real." Victoria looked at him. She said, "You're a strange person to have met in a hotel lobby." He looked at her with that quiet, unreadable expression. "You were late," he said. "It might not have happened at all." "Don't tell me that." "Okay." She looked out the window for a moment. "When's the last time someone told you something you didn't want to hear and you needed to hear it?" He thought about it. "Few months ago, my structural engineer told me I was carrying a project that was too big for my current team size. I told him he was wrong." He paused. "He wasn't wrong." "What did you do?" "Hired 2 more people and admitted he'd been right." "Was that hard?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. She liked that. She liked that he didn't soften it or dress it up. "I'm not good at it," she said, "being told things I don't want to hear." "You seem like you're managing okay," he said with a slight nod to the conversation they were in. "This is different," she said. "This isn't business." "No," he agreed. She looked at him. "What made you stay and talk to her yesterday? A lot of people would have smiled at a child and gone back to their phone." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "She asked a real question," he said, "about something that mattered to her. When a person does that, the thing you owe them is a real answer." He paused. "She happened to be 7. It doesn't change the math." Victoria absorbed that. "The math," she said. "Yeah." You apply engineering principles to human interaction." "I apply engineering principles to most things," he said. "It annoys people sometimes." "I don't find it annoying," she said. "I know," he said. "That's also something I noticed." She looked at him. There was a moment, short, specific, the kind that passes before you can fully categorize it, where she was very aware of being looked at by someone who was not trying to impress her, intimidate her, sell her something, or require anything from her. It was an unusual feeling. She picked up her coffee. "Tell me about the structural problem," she said. "On your project." He looked at her, slightly surprised. "You actually want to know?" "I actually want to know," she said. "I've spent 20 years in real estate development. I understand load-bearing issues," he told her. She asked 3 questions that made him recalibrate something he'd been assuming about the scope of the remediation. She didn't offer to help. She didn't mention her resources or her connections. She just asked questions, good ones, the kind that came from genuine understanding, and he answered them, and they went back and forth about a structural problem in a building on the near north side, until the girls reappeared with matching expressions of focused urgency because they had found an exhibit about cantilever bridges that required immediate adult supervision. They went together. That was Saturday. Sunday, Caleb had a site issue and sent Olivia to spend the day with her aunt. Monday, the attorneys finalized the first phase of the Meridian paperwork, and Victoria was in meetings from 7 in the morning until 6 in the evening. Tuesday, Amelia asked if Olivia was going to the park. Wednesday, Caleb texted he'd gotten her number from the business card she hadn't remembered giving him because she apparently gave business cards reflexively in all social situations, which was something she'd need to examine at some point to say that Olivia was free Thursday afternoon if Amelia wanted to visit the lakefront. They went to the lakefront. The girls ran ahead on the path. Victoria and Caleb walked at a pace that was slower than either of them needed to walk, which was a thing they didn't discuss. They talked about his company, about what had happened when he'd left the service and why he'd chosen construction specifically, about the first job he'd taken, which had been a disaster in 3 separate ways, and about what he'd learned from it, about the kind of work that felt worth doing versus the kind that just paid, about the difference which in his telling was significant. He asked about her companies, not as flattery, not as professional interest performing, but as genuine questions about how a person built something from nothing, which he found interesting because he was building something from nothing, and it turned out they had more in common in that regard than either of them had expected. She talked more than she usually did with people she'd known for less than a week. She noticed this. She didn't stop. On the way back from the lakefront, Amelia walked beside Olivia in front of them and was in the middle of explaining the hydraulic principles behind the Chicago River's reversal, a fact she had apparently absorbed sometime in the last 48 hours when Olivia interrupted her to ask something about the depth of the river, and Amelia said she'd need to look it up, but had a guess, and they argued about the guess with the specific, affectionate conviction of people who are in the process of becoming friends. Caleb watched them. His expression was the one he had when he was filing something he intended to keep. "She's good with Olivia," he said. "Olivia is good for her," Victoria said. "There's a difference." He looked at her. "How so?" "Olivia doesn't know Amelia's history," she said. "She's never seen the quiet version. She met the version in that lobby, the version that was already coming back. So with Olivia, Amelia doesn't have to explain herself or live down a version of herself she no longer wants to be." She paused. "Adults always carry both versions of her. Olivia only has one." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "That's a generous way to think about your own role in this," he said. "I'm trying to be accurate," she said, "not generous. Adults usually make those two things the same when they're talking about their kids." "I try not to," she said. "I've spent enough time watching people make decisions based on what they wanted to be true instead of what was actually true. I'd rather be honest about a hard thing than comfortable about a false one." He nodded. He seemed to be deciding something. "When we were on the hardest deployments," he said, "the ones where you didn't know the outcome and you couldn't control most of the variables, the thing that kept a team functional wasn't optimism. It was accuracy. You had to be willing to see exactly what was in front of you, the good and the bad, without adding or subtracting." He paused. "Most people can't do that. It's harder than it sounds." "You think I can?" she said. "I think you're doing it right now," he said. "Watching your daughter get better and refusing to let yourself pretend it means everything is resolved. Most parents would be celebrating without the caveat." "The caveat is real." "I know," he said. "That's the point." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How do you do it? Stay accurate about Olivia." He looked at the girls ahead. "By remembering that she's not mine to fix," he said. "She's mine to love. There's a difference." Something landed in Victoria's chest, not lightly. "That's different from what I'm doing," she said. "Yeah. I've been treating her like a problem I created and need to fix." "Yeah." She said it like a diagnosis, without self-flagellation, not the kind that becomes its own performance, but the clean, clear acknowledgement of a thing that was true and needed to be seen. "Okay," she said, quietly. "Okay," he said. "I'm filing it away," she said, "for when I need it." He looked at her with that expression she was starting to identify, the one that wasn't quite a smile but was related to one. "You file things." "It's how I process." "I know," he said. "I noticed." Ahead, Amelia had stopped walking. She turned back to look at them. Not with anxiety, not the careful, monitoring look she sometimes had, checking for something in Victoria's expression. Just looking back, making sure they were there. Victoria raised a hand. Amelia turned back to Olivia and kept talking. Caleb said nothing, but beside her his pace was the same, unhurried, steady, the kind of presence that didn't require comment. The city moved around them. The girls walked ahead. And Victoria Harrington, who had built a billion-dollar empire on the certainty that she didn't need anyone to stand beside her, walked next to a man who understood in some quiet and specific way she hadn't yet named exactly what it meant to carry things alone. She didn't name it yet, but she felt its shape. And somewhere in front of them, her daughter was explaining hydraulic engineering to a new friend, both hands moving, her voice clear and carrying over the sound of the city, unafraid of what anyone thought about the things she cared about. For the first time in 14 months, Victoria didn't hold her breath waiting for it to stop. She just listened and kept walking. 3 things happened in the week that followed, each of which seemed small at the time. The first was that Amelia asked on Wednesday morning, while Victoria was reviewing contracts at the hotel suite desk, whether they could stay in Chicago a little longer. Not dramatically, not with explanation. She just looked up from her notebook and said, "Can we stay? Olivia wants to show me the building her dad is fixing." Victoria said, "I'll see what I can move." She moved 3 things and extended the hotel by 10 days. The second was that Caleb called, not texted, called on Thursday evening to say that there was a problem on the site that he needed to deal with, and he wanted her to know Olivia wouldn't be available Friday, in case Amelia had been counting on it. He said it the way someone says something when they've decided the other person deserves to be told directly, rather than through logistics. She said, "Is there anything I can do?" There was a pause. "Not yet," he said. "But thank you." She noted the yet. She thought about it after she hung up. The third was that Friday night, alone in the suite again, she looked at the city from the same window, the same city. 8 days later, and realized she wasn't sitting with unanswered questions the way she had been on the first night. She was sitting with something different, something she'd checked the edges of, but not name yet. Something that had the weight of being real. The problem on the site was worse than Caleb had said. Victoria figured this out, not because he told her he didn't, but because she had spent 20 years in real estate development, and she knew what a project looked like when it was quietly hemorrhaging, and the following Monday, when she walked past the near North Side site on her way back from the Meridian office, she could see it in the way the crew was moving. Too deliberate. The kind of careful that comes not from precision, but from men who have been told to slow down, because the thing they're working on has become complicated in ways that affect their jobs. She stopped at the fence line the same way she had that first morning, which was a thing she'd apparently started doing now, stopping at that fence. Caleb was on the phone near the temporary office trailer, back to her, one hand pressed flat against the side of the trailer. She could tell from 20 feet away that the call was not going well. Not from his voice, he was too controlled for that, but from the way his shoulders had a particular set to them, the set of a man holding something heavy very still so it doesn't spill. She didn't interrupt. She went back to the hotel. But she did something else that evening. She called her attorney Diane, who had been her closest friend since their undergraduate years at Northwestern, and who had spent the last 2 decades being alternately exasperated by and fiercely loyal to Victoria in approximately equal measure. "I need you to pull whatever's publicly available on Whitmore Structural," Victoria said. "Chicago registered 3 years old mid-rise restoration." There was a pause on Diane's end. "Professionally or personally?" "Both." Another pause. "Okay, that's new." "Diane, I'm not saying anything. I'm pulling the records." The sound of typing. "Give me an hour." What Diane found wasn't dramatic. It was in some ways worse than dramatic because it was the kind of problem that was entirely unfair and entirely real and had the specific shape of something that was about to bury a good company for reasons that had nothing to do with competence. The hotel corporation that owned the near North Side building, a subsidiary of a larger hospitality group called Meridian Collective, which Victoria recognized because the commercial real estate world was smaller than it appeared from the outside, had sent Whitmore Structural a formal notice of breach the previous week. The grounds were construction delays and cost overruns. The delays were real. The overruns were real. What was also real, buried in the project documentation that Diane had managed to access through a contact at the city's building department, was that the structural problem that had caused both the undocumented modification to the load-bearing wall had been present in the building before Caleb's company ever set foot on the property. It had not been disclosed in the pre-construction survey. It had not been in the plans his crew had been given to work from. Whitmore Structural had discovered a problem they hadn't been told about, had dealt with it responsibly, had reported it to the owner, and were now being held liable for the consequences of discovering it. Victoria read through what Diane had sent her. She sat with it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Caleb. He answered on the third ring. His voice was level. It was always level. She was starting to understand that this was not the absence of feeling, but the presence of a particular kind of discipline, the kind that gets built in places where falling apart is not an option. "I know about the breach notice," she said. Silence. "I want you to know I wasn't looking for it," she said. "I saw the crew on Monday, and I asked Diane to pull the public records. That's all she accessed." More silence. Then, "What did you find?" "Enough to know that the undisclosed wall modification is the root cause and that you reported it to the owner within 48 hours of discovery." She paused. "And enough to know that Meridian Collective's legal team is going to argue that your obligation was to assess the full structural state of the building before beginning work, which is going to be a fight, because that's technically arguable, even if it's not right." He was quiet. "Caleb." "Yeah," he said, low, contained. "How bad is it?" A pause, the kind of pause that is its own answer. "If they move forward with the breach claim, and it goes the way their lawyers are pushing it, I lose the contract, I lose the performance bond, and I'm probably looking at a lawsuit that ties up my operating capital for 18 months minimum." He said it clean. No drama. Like he was reading the structural analysis of a wall. "Which means I can't make payroll past month 3, which means I have to let my crew go, which means 8 people lose jobs." Another pause. "Olivia's college fund is in the business right now. I was going to move it this year. I didn't move it yet." Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay." The word had something in it she hadn't heard from him before. Not quite bitterness. Something closer to the sound a person makes when they're braced. "I'm thinking," she said. "Victoria." His voice changed. "I'm not calling this in." "Calling what in?" "Whatever you're about to offer," he said. "I didn't tell you about this. You found it, and I appreciate that. But I'm not—" He stopped. "I handle my own problems." She kept her voice very even. "I know that. I've been handling my own problems since I was 19 years old, and I'm not about to—" "Caleb," she said it quietly, and something in the way she said it stopped him. "I know. I hear you. I'm not going to offer you money, and I'm not going to go around you." She paused. "I'm asking you to let me think. Just let me think. That's all I'm asking for right now." A long pause. "Thinking," he said. "That's all." Another pause. "All right." She sat at the window for 45 minutes after they hung up the city, doing its city things below her, and she turned the problem over the same way she turned all problems, not emotionally, not reactively, but with the particular cold clarity that had made her very good at what she did. She mapped the angles. She thought about Meridian Collective, about what she knew of them, about what she didn't know, about who she knew, who might know what she didn't. And then she picked up the phone and called someone she hadn't spoken to in 4 years, a man named Gerald Forsyth, who had been in commercial real estate for 35 years, and who knew everything about every major hospitality property group operating in the Midwest, because Gerald knew everything about everything in a 100-mile radius and never forgot a detail. "Gerald," she said when he answered, "tell me about Meridian Collective." She did not tell Caleb what she was doing. She told him she was thinking. She was thinking. She was also making 7 phone calls over 3 days to understand a situation that she was increasingly certain was not what it appeared to be on the surface, and what she found piece by piece was this. Meridian Collective had a pattern. 3 projects in the last 4 years where they had purchased distressed commercial properties, hired smaller construction contractors, and then when inevitable complications arose from properties that had not been adequately surveyed, pre-acquisition had applied legal pressure sufficient to void the contracts and recover the performance bonds. In 2 of those cases, the contractor had settled. In one, they'd fought and lost 18 months of their lives in litigation before finally winning a judgment that barely covered their legal fees. The pattern was not illegal. It was a strategy. Buy distressed properties, cheap lowball the pre-construction survey hire contractors who don't have the resources to fight a breach claim, and use the performance bond as a secondary revenue mechanism when projects get complicated. Victoria found this out on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, she sat across from Caleb at a coffee shop 3 blocks from his site. It was the first time they had been in the same room without the girls since the cafe at the Architecture Museum. This was different. She had asked to meet. She had a reason, and he'd come in knowing it, which meant the easy parallel quality of their recent time together was replaced by something more direct. He sat across from her with his coffee and looked at her with an expression that was already braced. She told him what she'd found. She laid it out the same way she'd lay out a business analysis factually, in order without editorializing, until she had given him all the information. She watched his face as she talked. He was very still, the stillness of a person who is absorbing something that is confirming a fear they already had. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's what my lawyer told me they were doing. He said it in different language, but that's the substance of it." "What does your lawyer recommend?" "Fight it," he said. "But his honest assessment is that it's going to be expensive. It's going to take time I don't have, and the outcome is not guaranteed, even if we're completely in the right." "He's correct on all 3 counts," she said. "So what are you suggesting?" She looked at him directly. "I'm not suggesting anything yet. I came to ask you something first." He waited. "The project," she said. "What's the state of the actual construction? If the breach claim went away tomorrow, where would the project stand?" He looked at her. She could see him recalibrating, adjusting to the fact that she was asking a real question, not a leading one. 90 days from completion," he said. "The wall issue is resolved. The new structural plan is approved by the city. My crew knows what they're doing. If we can operate without the legal threat hanging over us, we finish clean and probably under the revised timeline." "And the property itself," she said. "The building." "Good bones," he said. "Whoever bought it into a bad situation, but the building itself is worth the investment. If someone finishes the restoration properly, it's a strong asset." She nodded. He looked at her. "What are you doing, Victoria?" It wasn't quite a question. She said, "I have a contact at a real estate investment group that has been looking for mid-size hospitality properties in the near North Corridor. I had dinner with their managing partner in September. He mentioned specifically that he was interested in properties that had clear structural quality but had gotten stuck in litigation or development problems because the price point becomes more favorable." She paused. "Meridian Collective is not in the business of managing long disputes. They are in the business of extracting performance bonds and moving on. If there's a clean offer on the property from a credible buyer, there's a reasonable chance they would rather close the deal and release the breach claim than spend 18 months in court." Caleb was very still. "You're talking about engineering an acquisition," he said. "I'm talking about calling a contact I have breakfast with twice a year and telling him about a property that genuinely fits what he said he was looking for," she said. "What happens after that is between him and Meridian Collective. And your interest in this is what exactly?" She held his gaze. "My interest is in a company that does good work, not getting destroyed by a predatory legal strategy because they discovered a structural problem that wasn't their fault." "That's not all of it," he said. She didn't look away. "No," she said. "It's not all of it." He looked at the table for a moment. His jaw was doing the thing, the slight set of it that she'd come to recognize as the external expression of an internal argument. "I told you," he said. "I handle my own problems." "I know. I've been handling my own problems since you were 19, she said gently. "You told me." He looked at her. Something moved through his expression that was complicated and layered, and she didn't have enough information to fully name it. "This isn't charity," she said. "I'm not giving you anything. I'm making a phone call that I would make anyway, because it serves my contact's interests, and the information is accurate. You keep doing your job. You finish the building. If it works, Meridian releases the claim, my contact gets a property he actually wants, and your crew has 90 days of work and a completed project on their record. And if it doesn't work, then you still have your lawyer and your documentation and the strongest possible factual case, and you haven't lost anything you didn't already have at risk." He was quiet. "Caleb," she said. 8 people, and Olivia's college fund." He flinched. It was small, barely visible, but she saw it. "That's not fair," he said. "No," she said. "It isn't, but it's true." He put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a moment. Then he looked at her. "Why?" he said. "Tell me the real reason, not the version that protects me from having to feel like I owe you something." She took a breath. "Because my daughter smiled again because of you," she said. "And not because you tried to make her smile. Not because you were trying to fix something or help someone or do a good thing. Because you sat down and you saw her. And that's rarer than you know. And people who do that deserve someone who stands beside them when it matters." She paused. "You've been standing beside everyone else for a very long time. Let someone stand beside you." The coffee shop was doing its coffee shop things around them. People ordering cups, moving the low hum of a place that didn't know it was containing a moment that mattered. Caleb looked at her for a long time. She didn't move. She didn't soften the argument or add to it or take any of it back. He said, "Make your call." "Okay," she said. "And Victoria." His voice was different, quieter and more direct than usual, which was saying something. "Yes." "Thank you," he said. She nodded. She didn't say, "You're welcome," because it didn't seem like the right shape for what had just happened between them. She just nodded and picked up her coffee and looked out the window and gave him a moment to put himself back together without anyone watching him do it. She made the call that afternoon. Her contact, a man named Robert Chang, who ran a mid-size investment group called Blue Bridge Capital and who had the specific quality of being simultaneously very smart and very direct, which Victoria found restful, listened to her describe the property for approximately 4 minutes before he said, "Send me the address." She sent it. He called back in 2 hours. "The building is exactly what I said I was looking for," he said. "What's the situation?" She explained the situation, the undisclosed structural issue, the contractor who'd handled it correctly, the breach claim, Meridian Collective's pattern. Robert was quiet for a moment. "You know the contractor?" "Yes." "Personally?" "Yes." "Okay," he said. "I'm going to have my people look at this. If the numbers work, I'll approach them." He paused. If Meridian decides to play difficult because someone they're already in a dispute with is now connected to an offer that could complicate things. I'm aware of that, she said, which is why I'm telling you directly and leaving it to your judgment. You're a complicated friend, Victoria. You've said that before. It gets truer every year. She could hear the smile in his voice. I'll call you. He called back on Friday. Meridian Collective, it turned out, was not sentimental about the property. The dispute with Whitmore Structural had become a line item in their quarterly review, a complicated line item their CFO had indicated that they would prefer to resolve. When Robert's people made a preliminary inquiry through proper channels, they found a company that was more interested in a clean exit than in the outcome of a breach claim that their own legal team had rated as winnable but resource-intensive. Preliminary discussions began on Friday afternoon. Caleb didn't know this yet. Victoria had told him the call was made. She'd told him it was in Robert's hands. She hadn't told him the speed of it because she didn't want him to carry the uncertainty of the timeline on top of everything else he was already managing. What she knew on Friday evening was this: there was a real possibility, not a certainty, a real substantive possibility that the thing threatening to bury a company built by a man who'd spent 12 years serving his country and 3 years building something of his own might resolve itself through a phone call she'd made because he'd talked to her daughter about cable tension. She sat with that. She also sat with the thing he'd said in the coffee shop. This isn't all of it, is it? And the fact that she'd said no. She hadn't said what the rest of it was. He hadn't asked her to. But the word sat between them, now acknowledged and unlabeled, which was its own kind of weight. It was Amelia who accelerated what might otherwise have stayed unlabeled for much longer. Saturday morning, Amelia and Olivia had been given permission with Marcus in close proximity to spend 2 hours at the park by the lakefront, drawing their imaginary city from different angles. They took this seriously. They had a system. Olivia designed the public transport infrastructure. Amelia did the structural architecture. They had detailed arguments about zoning. Victoria was working at the hotel suite desk. Caleb was on site for a morning inspection. They had agreed to meet the girls at noon. At 11:45, Amelia called. This was significant. Amelia had a phone for safety purposes and used it approximately 3 times a week. She did not call Victoria unless there was an actual reason. Mom? I'm here. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. A pause. Olivia's sad. Victoria stopped typing. What happened? I asked her about her mom, Amelia said, because Olivia never talks about her mom, and I asked why, and she said her mom left when she was 3, and she doesn't really remember her, and she started crying. Not a lot. A little. Another pause. I didn't know what to say, so I said that I was sorry, and she said it was okay, but she's still a little sad. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That was the right thing to say, Amelia. I know, but I wanted to. I wanted to fix it, and I don't know how to fix it. Something moved through Victoria, specific and sharp. Baby, she said, listen to me. You can't fix it. Her mom leaving is something that happened, and it's sad, and it can't be unfixed. But what you can do, what you're already doing, is be beside her. That's the thing that helps. Not fixing, being beside. A pause. Like how Caleb sat beside me. Victoria closed her eyes. Yes, she said, exactly like that. Okay, Amelia said. I'm going to stay beside her. That's exactly right, Victoria said. Can you come now instead of noon? I'm leaving now, Victoria said. She was out the door in 4 minutes. She called Caleb on the way. He answered on the first ring she'd learned. He always answered on the first ring, which said something about how he operated. Olivia's fine, she said immediately. But Amelia asked her about her mother and she got a little upset. Nothing serious, but she might want you. Silence for a count of 3. On my way, he said. They arrived at the park from different directions within about 2 minutes of each other, which was another thing that didn't require comment. Olivia was sitting on the bench beside Amelia, not crying anymore, but with the look of a child who'd come through something small and left a little residue on the air. Amelia had her arm around Olivia's shoulders, in the careful, serious way of the child who had decided that what she'd been told be beside her was a thing she was going to do correctly. Caleb sat down on Olivia's other side. I didn't say anything for a moment, just sat down. Olivia leaned into him automatically, the specific lean of a child who knows exactly where to find the thing she needs. He put his arm around her. I'm good, Dad, Olivia said. Her voice was steady. the claim of a child who wanted to be believed. "I know," he said. "We're going to sit here for a minute anyway." "Because you want to?" "Because I want to," he confirmed. Amelia looked at Victoria. Victoria sat down next to Amelia. They sat there, the four of them, on two benches in the lakefront park, while the city moved around them and nobody tried to explain anything or resolve anything or make it better than it was. After a while, "Did we decide the Western District has residential or commercial zoning?" "Mixed use," Amelia said, "with height restrictions. Obviously, you can't have residential without height restrictions or the shadows are a problem." "I didn't think about shadows." "I thought about shadows," Amelia said. They went back to the notebook. Victoria looked at Caleb. He was looking at his daughter with the expression he had when he was filing something he intended to keep. Then he looked at Victoria, and something in the exchange between them had a different quality than usual. Quieter, more unguarded, the particular quality of two people who have just been through something small but true together, and both know it. She said quietly, so the girls couldn't hear. "She asked me how to fix it." He looked at her. "I told her you can't fix it," Victoria said. "You can be beside it." He looked at her for a moment. "You told her that," he said. "Yes." "That's what I told you," he said. "I know." She held his gaze. "I filed it away, for when I needed it. Turns out I needed it today." Something happened in his expression. Not the partial smile, not the filing away look, not the evenness he carried as his default. Something more exposed than that, and less controlled, and more real. He said, "Olivia's mother left when she was 3. "I know," Victoria said quietly. "Amelia told me. I've handled that alone since then. Her questions, her grief, the things she needs that I can't always, the things a mother would know how to—" He stopped. His jaw did the set thing. "I've handled it alone. I know. I told myself that was strength." "I know that too," she said. "I told myself the same thing." He looked at the girls for a moment. They were drawing heads bent over the notebook, the afternoon moving around them. "It's not weakness," he said quietly, like he was saying something he'd been working toward for a while and had just found the landing for. "Asking for someone to be beside you. It's not weakness." Victoria looked at him. She said, "No, it isn't." He met her eyes. And there it was, the thing that had been unlabeled between them since the coffee shop, since the lakefront walk, since the fence on the first morning when she'd gone back, because she had something she needed to say. The thing that was not business, and not strategy, and not the careful management of a situation. It was simpler than any of that. It was two people who had both spent a very long time carrying things alone, recognizing that quality in each other, across the distance of a park bench on a Saturday afternoon in October. She didn't name it out loud. He didn't name it out loud, but they both knew. The following week was dense with things that had nothing to do with what had happened on the park bench and everything to do with the ordinary machinery of their two lives continuing to operate. Victoria's Meridian acquisition hit an unexpected regulatory snag, a filing issue with the city's commercial zoning office that required 3 days of legal maneuvering and 3 very long evenings at the hotel suite desk. Caleb's crew found a secondary issue in the building's plumbing infrastructure that added 2 weeks to the revised timeline and required a conversation with the owner's representative that he described to her on Tuesday evening over the phone as illuminating, in the tone that meant it had been adversarial and he'd handled it and moved on. They talked on the phone most evenings, not for long, not with preamble. One of them would call and they'd talk about whatever was actually happening, the regulatory snag, the plumbing issue. Amelia's latest upgrade to the imaginary city's bridge network, Olivia's school project on the Chicago fire of 1871, which she had approached with characteristic precision, and which had devolved into a detailed argument with her teacher about whether the fire had accelerated or impeded the city's long-term architectural development. "What did her teacher say?" Victoria asked. "That it was a very interesting perspective and perhaps beyond the scope of 3rd grade." "What did Olivia say?" "That she disagreed with the scope." Victoria laughed, a real one not managed. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "That's just it's a good sound." She didn't say anything for a moment. "I don't laugh enough," she said. "You laugh at Amelia," he said, "when she doesn't know you're watching. That's different." "It's the same sound," he said. She held the phone and looked at the city from the window and said, "Robert Chang called me today." A pause. "And They've moved to formal discussions, she said. It looks like it's going to happen. The structure of the deal would include Meridian releasing all contractor claims as a condition of clean transfer. That would include the breach claim. Silence. Caleb. Yeah, he said, very quietly. It's not done, she said. 2 to 3 more weeks on the negotiation, but it looks like it's going to happen. More silence. 8 people keep their jobs, he said finally. Yes. Olivia's fund is safe. Yes. A long pause. She could hear his breathing steady, deliberate, the breathing of a person who is holding something very still because he doesn't trust himself with it yet. I've spent 15 years, he said, making sure nobody had to worry about things because of me, making sure the people around me were covered. My team, my crew. Olivia. He stopped. And then this happened, and for 3 weeks I've been watching it and not being able to fix it and feeling like I was failing everyone I was supposed to protect. I know, she said. You did this, he said. You made a phone call because my daughter had a friend and now my crew has their jobs and Olivia has her future and I... He stopped again. He was not a man who lost the thread of his own sentences. She understood that the stopping was the same as what other people did with tears. He didn't do it that way. He just stopped. I don't know how to... You don't have to, she said. You don't have to do anything with it. Victoria. Caleb. She said his name and let it be what it was. Not a deflection. Not managing. Just saying his name steady and clear the way he said hers when she needed to stop running and stand still. You would have found a way out of it. You're not a person who doesn't find a way. This is me being beside you. That's all. Silence. And then quieter than she'd ever heard him. It helps. I know, she said. It helps me too. She sat at the window for a long time after they hung up. Somewhere across the city in a mid-rise building on the near north side, 8 people were going to be able to keep going to work. A little girl was going to be able to go to college. A man who had survived things nobody was allowed to talk about was going to finish what he'd started. Victoria had not done that by fixing something. She had done it by making a phone call because she knew the right person. She had done it by standing beside someone instead of standing over the problem. She thought about that. She thought about Amelia on the park bench, arm around Olivia's shoulders, being beside her friend's sadness with all the serious 7-year-old precision she brought to everything she cared about. Be beside it, not fix it. Her daughter had learned that in an afternoon. Victoria had needed a former Navy SEAL, a construction fence, a coffee shop table, and 3 weeks of phone calls to get there. But she'd gotten there. The last thing that happened in October wasn't dramatic. It happened on a Thursday morning 10 days before Victoria was scheduled to return to New York, while she was walking with Caleb from the coffee shop, where they'd started meeting in the mornings when their schedules allowed it. Not every day, but often enough that it had become a thing toward the site. They were talking about the plumbing issue which had resolved, and the timeline which was back on track, and she was going to peel off at the next block to head back toward the hotel when he stopped walking. She stopped too. He looked at her. When you go back to New York, he said. Yes. I don't want that to be... He stopped. Started differently. Olivia and Amelia aren't going to be fine just because I'm going to tell them that long distance is manageable for 2 8-year-olds who are designing a city together. They're not fine, she agreed. They're going to be upset. And I'm not fine either, he said. It came out more directly than he'd perhaps intended. His jaw did the set thing. He held her gaze. I want to say that clearly. She looked at him. She said, I'm not fine with it either. He nodded. Not performing relief, just absorbing it. I don't know what that means, he said. Logistically, you're in New York. I'm in Chicago. Our work isn't exactly movable. No, she said. But you have a licensing registration in 3 other states. And I have a development office in Chicago. I've been staffing at half capacity for 2 years because I haven't had the right reason to commit to this market. He looked at her. That's a lot of logistics for something we haven't named yet. I'm a person who plans, she said. I plan before I name things, usually. Usually. I named what I felt in that park bench in about 45 seconds, she said. That was unusual for me. Something in his expression moved. What did you name it? She looked at him for a moment. The city moved around them. It was morning. There was light coming in at that particular sideways October angle, and Caleb Whitmore was standing in front of her with the same expression he'd had on the bench in the hotel lobby that first afternoon, receiving information, filing it carefully, making space for whatever it was to be what it actually was. "That I don't want to go back to being alone," she said. "In the way I was alone before, the way that felt like strength and was actually just a very organized kind of empty." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I know that kind." "I know you do." He looked at her. He reached out and adjusted something the collar of her coat, which had turned under on one side with the same matter-of-fact care he used for everything. Then he left his hand there for a moment at the edge of her collar, and his eyes came up to hers. "I'm going to ask Olivia how she feels about New York," he said. "Amelia already thinks Chicago is better for her city's infrastructure," she said. "Olivia would say the same thing about New York." "Then they'll argue about it," she said, "which will give them something to do." He almost smiled, the full version this time. It changed his face, made him look less like someone managing things and more like someone who didn't have to. She filed it away. She was going to need it. 2 days before Victoria was due to return to New York, Robert Chang called to confirm that the deal had closed. Meridian Collective, in exchange for a clean acquisition by Blue Bridge Capital of the near North Side property at a number that worked for everyone, except the concept of Meridian's predatory contracting strategy, had released all claims against Whitmore Structural in full. The breach notice was withdrawn. The performance bond was restored. 8 people kept their jobs. Olivia's college fund was no longer at risk. Victoria heard all of this from Robert on the phone and said, "Thank you, Robert. Genuine, simple." "Thank yourself," he said. "It's a good property. I was going to find it eventually. You just saved me 6 months." A pause. "He must be something, this contractor." "He is," she said. "Well," a smile in his voice, "it's good to hear you sound like that." "Like what?" "Like a person," he said, "instead of a portfolio." She was quiet for a moment. "Goodbye, Robert." "Goodbye, Victoria." She sat for a moment. Then she called Caleb. He answered on the first ring. "It's done," she said. The silence that followed was not like his other silences. It had a different texture. The texture of a man who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has just for the first time in weeks been allowed to put it down. "It's done," he said. "Yes." A long pause. "Victoria." "Yes." "When Amelia asked you," he said carefully, "how to be beside Olivia's sadness, and you told her you can't fix it, but you can be beside it." "Yes. That was—" He stopped, found a different way. "I've been thinking about that." "I know," she said. "I've been carrying Olivia's situation with her mother," he said, "for 5 years, alone, because that's what I do. And I thought that was me protecting her. But what I think now is that she's been watching me carry it alone and learning from that. Learning that alone is what you do with hard things." Victoria held the phone. "And I don't want her to learn that," he said. "I want her to learn what Amelia showed her on the bench, that you find someone to be beside you." "Yes," Victoria said. Her voice was very steady. "That's what I want Amelia to learn too." "We're both still learning it ourselves," he said. "We are," she said. "We'll keep learning it together." Another pause. "Together," he said, carefully, like he was checking the weight of the word. "Together," she confirmed. She heard him exhale, not dramatically, just like a man who had been breathing carefully for a very long time and had just for a moment stopped managing it and let it be. "I'll come to New York," he said. "In 2 weeks. Olivia has a fall break. Amelia will want to take her to the Natural History Museum. Olivia will have opinions about the fossil exhibit." "They'll argue about it all the way home," Victoria said. "Good," he said. "They'll need something to do." She smiled. She was at the window again, her window the city below Chicago, doing its October things, and she smiled at the phone in a way that had nothing managed about it. "Good," she said. Then it settled. And for the first time in a very long time, something in her chest settled with it. 2 weeks felt longer than it should have. Victoria had been back in New York for 11 days when she registered with the particular precision she applied to things. She wasn't quite willing to examine directly that she had rearranged her Thursday afternoon twice in 4 days because something had come up, and both times the something had been legitimate, and both times she'd found herself mildly irritated in a way that had nothing to do with the meetings themselves. She was irritated because Thursday was when Caleb called. Not always. They talked most evenings, sometimes briefly, sometimes for an hour. But Thursday was when he called in the late afternoon when his crew had wrapped for the day, and Olivia was at her homework, and the city was doing that thing cities do at 4:30, when the light changes and the pace drops by half a degree, and something in a person unclenches enough to actually talk. She'd taken both calls in her office, standing at the window that looked north over Central Park, which was not the lakefront, but was still a window and still a city, and was becoming associated in her mind with a particular quality of conversation. Diane had noticed. Diane noticed everything, which was one of the reasons Victoria had kept her close for 20 years, and one of the reasons Victoria found her intermittently exhausting. "You're different," Diane said on day 9, appearing in Victoria's office with 2 coffees and the particular expression she wore when she had decided to have a conversation, whether Victoria agreed to it or not. "I'm working," Victoria said. "You're always working. You're working differently." Diane sat down without being invited, which she had been doing for 20 years. "There's a quality of, I don't know, patience. You've been patient all week. Do you know how unsettling that is?" "Diane, the Kowalski contract. You gave Hoffman 3 days to respond instead of calling him at 7 in the morning. 3 days is a reasonable... You've never given anyone 3 days in your life," Diane said. "You give people 36 hours and then you call them at 7 in the morning." She looked at Victoria. "What happened in Chicago?" Victoria looked at her for a moment. "Several things," she said. "Does one of them have a name?" "Diane. I'm your attorney and your oldest friend, and I pulled records on him at your request, which means I'm already involved." She picked up her coffee. "I'm just asking if he has a name." "His name is Caleb," Victoria said. "You know that. You found his records. And he's coming to New York on Friday with his daughter." Diane looked at her. Something in her expression shifted the professional assessment, giving way to something that was just a friend reading another friend's face. "You like him," she said. "I do," Victoria said. "Not in the careful assessed this person serves a useful function way you like most people." "No," Victoria said. "Not in that way." Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good," and picked up her coffee and went back to her office without another word. Victoria looked at the window. Thursday was tomorrow. He called at 4:27. She answered before the second ring, which she clocked and did not comment on internally, which meant she was getting better at this. "How's the site?" she said. 72 days out, he said. "If the city doesn't come back with additional requirements on the south elevation variance." "Will they?" "Probably not, but probably not is not the same as definitely not, and I've stopped counting on probably not." "That's very healthy," she said. "How's the Kowalski contract?" he said. He'd asked about it on Tuesday when she'd been working through a difficult provision and had offered a perspective on contractor liability language that had, somewhat to her surprise, been genuinely useful. "Hoffman came back today," she said. "He accepted the provision." "Good." "You were right about the framing," she said. "He needed to feel like he'd gotten something, not like he'd been beaten." "People usually do," Caleb said. "You learned that from construction." "From the Navy first," he said. "From construction second. From everywhere after that." She leaned back in her chair. Outside the park was doing its late afternoon thing. "Olivia's flight is still at 2:15. We land at 4, assuming no delays." "Amelia has made a schedule," Victoria said. "I want to be transparent about that." "Of course she has. The Natural History Museum is Saturday morning. She's built in time for an argument about the fossil exhibit. She also included the High Line on Sunday because she wants to show Olivia the elevated infrastructure. Olivia is going to have opinions about the elevated infrastructure. Amelia anticipates this. She's prepared counter-arguments." Victoria paused. "They're going to be fine." "They're always fine," he said. "They argue like they've known each other for years." "They have the same brain," Victoria said. "It just runs on different operating systems." He made the sound the short, genuine, not-performed version of a laugh. She'd gotten very good at listening for it. "Victoria," he said. The way he said her name had changed since Chicago. It had always been direct. It was still direct. But there was something in it now that wasn't the neutral directness of a person exchanging information. It was the directness of someone who had decided that this particular person deserved to hear their name said like it mattered. She'd noticed it the first time he'd done it and filed it. She'd taken it out to look at it approximately 7 times since. "Yes," she said. "I've been thinking about something." "Tell me." Amelia's getting better, he said. Consistently. Not linearly, I know it doesn't work linearly, but the trend. Yes, she said carefully. And I think part of it is you, he said. Not what you're fixing, what you've stopped trying to fix. You're doing the beside thing. I can hear it when you talk about her. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I'm trying, she said. You're doing it, he said. I'm not telling you to be encouraged in an empty way. I'm telling you because I'm watching from a distance and I can see something you might not be able to see because you're inside it. She held the phone. The park was going golden at the edges, the particular October light that made New York look like it was trying to be honest about itself. That means a lot to me, she said. I know, he said. That's why I said it. She smiled at the window. 2 days, she said. 2 days, he confirmed. She hung up and stood at the window for another few minutes before going back to the Kowalski contract, which seemed in the scheme of things considerably less interesting than it had been an hour ago. Caleb arrived on Friday afternoon with Olivia and 1 bag each, which Victoria noted with the specific appreciation of someone who had watched executives travel with 4 pieces of luggage for a weekend and always found it baffling. Olivia, who was compact and dark-haired and precise in the way that made her unmistakably her father's daughter, walked into the entry of Victoria's apartment building, looked at the lobby and said to Amelia, "Did you count the load-bearing columns?" Amelia said 6, but 2 are decorative. Olivia said, "How can you tell the casing material?" Amelia said, "Look at the finish." Olivia looked. She nodded slowly. "You're right." They went upstairs. Caleb watched them go, then looked at Victoria. "Hello," he said. "Hello," she said. And because they were 2 people who had spent months learning to be precise about things that mattered, and because the lobby was not the right venue, and because Amelia and Olivia were already in the elevator arguing about decorative versus structural elements with no awareness of anything else in their vicinity, because of all of that, he simply looked at her for a moment with the expression that was not quite the partial smile, but was something more than that, something with more of him in it, and she looked back with the same quality of attention, and they left the lobby and went upstairs. The weekend was ordinary in all the ways that made it matter. Saturday at the Natural History Museum. Amelia had been right. There was an argument about the fossil exhibit. Olivia felt that the sauropod skeleton's mounting underrepresented its actual weight distribution, which Amelia considered an interesting point, and they stood in front of the sauropod for 14 minutes, working through the physics of it, while a museum docent, a young man who had not expected to spend his Saturday afternoon in a detailed discussion of skeletal load tolerance with 2 8-year-olds, handled it with admirable composure. Caleb and Victoria stood 2 paces back and slightly to the left of each other, which was where they always ended up, and watched. "She's not going to let this go," Victoria said quietly. "Olivia, no," Caleb agreed. "She'll be drawing diagrams tonight." "Amelia will too," Victoria said. "They'll compare them in the morning and argue about whose is more accurate, and neither of them will back down." "That's the best possible outcome," he said. She looked at him. He was watching the girls with that expression, filing it away, keeping it, and she thought not for the first time that this was one of the things about him she had not expected and had not been prepared for. That he looked at ordinary things with the same attention he gave to complicated ones. That he didn't make a hierarchy of what deserved to be noticed. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always." "When you met me," she said in the lobby, "what did you think honestly?" He considered that. "I thought you were the most controlled person I'd ever seen walk through a door," he said. "And I thought you were frightened." "Of what?" "Of what you'd found when you came back from your meeting," he said. "Not of me. Of what it meant that your daughter had spoken to someone who wasn't you." She absorbed that. "You saw that in 30 seconds. I was trained to assess situations quickly," he said. "Some of it transfers." "And now," she said, "what do you think now?" He turned to look at her. He looked at her the way he'd looked at Amelia's notebook that first afternoon, not to judge it, not to solve it, just to see it accurately. "I think you're the most capable person I've ever met," he said. "And I think you've been using capability as a substitute for something else for a very long time. And I think you're figuring out that those 2 things aren't actually in conflict." He paused. "And I think you're doing it faster than most people would." She was quiet for a moment. "You're very direct," she said. "You told me you prefer it." "I do," she said. "I was complimenting you." The corner of his mouth moved, the full version again. She was collecting those. Saturday night, the girls were in Amelia's room with the notebook and a large sheet of drafting paper that Amelia had produced from somewhere and spread across the floor. They were extending the imaginary city. Victoria and Caleb sat in the kitchen with wine and the kind of conversation that happens when two people have been talking on the phone for 3 weeks and are now in the same room and can finally use the pauses properly. He told her about Olivia's mother. Not in full, she didn't ask for full, and he didn't offer it, but in the shape of it. A relationship that had been good and then hadn't been and then had ended, and the thing that had hurt most wasn't the ending itself, but the way Olivia had looked for her in every room for a year afterward and eventually slowly stopped looking. She stopped asking about her when she was 5, he said. Just stopped, and I didn't know if that was healing or if it was something worse. Her therapist said it was processing. I'm still not sure I believe that fully. She still thinks about her, Victoria said. She talked to Amelia about it. I know. He turned the wine glass slightly. That's the first time she's talked to anyone other than the therapist about it in 2 years. That she chose Amelia means something. It means she felt safe enough, Victoria said. He looked at her. That's your thing now, he said. Safe enough. You gave it to me, she said. I use what works. I was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking, he said, about what I want Olivia to understand about relationships, about what healthy looks like. Because she doesn't have a reference point for what her mother and I had at the beginning, and she does have a reference point for how it ended, and I want— He stopped. I want her to see something different. Victoria held his gaze. I want that too, she said. For Amelia. She paused. Her father and I were good partners. We were never— She searched for it. We never looked at each other the way I apparently looked at the park bench in Chicago. His expression shifted. What do you mean? Diane called it, she said. She said I came back from Chicago different. She said I looked like a person instead of a portfolio. She looked at her wine glass. I think what she meant was that something had come back online, something I'd decided was a liability and turned off. What thing? She looked at him. Needing, she said. The act of needing someone. I decided at some point that I didn't do it, that I was better without it, that it made me more effective and more protected and more capable. She paused. And it did make me more effective, but it also made me the person who couldn't reach her daughter. He was very still. I don't think that's the whole reason, he said carefully. No, she agreed, but it's part of it. Amelia couldn't feel me needing her because I'd gotten so good at not needing anyone, and children need to feel needed, not depended on, that's different, but held. She paused, like they're part of the structure. He looked at her for a long moment. That's a construction metaphor, he said. I've been spending time with a builder, she said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. It was the first time he'd done it, a deliberate, unhurried gesture, the kind that isn't testing anything, but is simply placing something true in the space between two people. She turned her hand over. They sat like that for a moment. From Amelia's room, there was a sound of discussion escalating into debate, which was the natural state of 2 8-year-olds designing a city together. Then Olivia's voice, very clear. The Southern District can't have that density without transit infrastructure. And Amelia, I have transit infrastructure. And Olivia, where? And a pause, and then, I'm adding it now. Victoria and Caleb looked at each other. She laughed. He laughed. And it was easier than she'd expected something like this to be, after so long of it being complicated or absent or managed into something else. And that ease was, she understood its own kind of answer. Sunday came and went. The High Line happened. Olivia had opinions about the elevated infrastructure, as predicted. Amelia had prepared counter-arguments also as predicted. They walked the length of it in a state of productive disagreement, which both of them seemed to find energizing. Victoria and Caleb walked the length of it too, and he told her about a project he was considering for the following year, a larger scope than anything he'd taken on before, a full adaptive reuse of a warehouse complex in the West Loop, which would require scaling his team significantly and carrying a different order of risk than he'd been comfortable with until recently. What changed? She asked. He looked at her. Someone told me that people who fix broken things deserve someone to stand beside them. He paused. Made me think about what I might be willing to fix if I wasn't doing it alone. She looked at him. Don't use my words against me, she said. I'm using them for both of us, he said. That's different. She shook her head. But she was smiling and he could see it, and he filed it away, and she knew he was filing it because she was doing the same thing. That evening, after the girls were both asleep, Olivia on the pullout in Amelia's room, the city plans spread across the floor, both of them having apparently worked past the point where the argument could continue. Victoria and Caleb sat in the living room in the particular quiet of a house with sleeping children. "I want to say something," he said. "Say it." "I came to New York this weekend thinking I was coming because of the girls," he said. That was the honest reason. They needed to see each other, and I had a fall break, and the logistics worked. She waited. "And that's true," he said. "But it was also I needed to see you in your city, not Chicago, not the hotel. Here." He gestured slightly, the apartment, the window, the sleeping children down the hall. "Here." "Why?" she said. "Because everything I know about you I learned in a context where you were partially off balance," he said. "Chicago was your territory but not your ground. Your work was there but your life is here. And I wanted to know—" He stopped. "I wanted to know if what I think about you holds up in the full picture." She looked at him. "And does it?" He looked back at her steadily in the way he had from the beginning. No performance, no management, just the clear, accurate look of a man who was seeing something and calling it what it was. "More than holds up," he said. She absorbed that. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah." "I need to tell you something that I haven't said to anyone," she said. "And I'm going to say it directly because I don't know how to be anything else at this point." "Okay." She looked at her hands for a moment, then at him. "Before Chicago, I had organized my life around the principle that I was better alone. Not happier. I didn't think happiness was a thing I was optimizing for anymore. Better, more effective, more protected. And I had convinced myself that Amelia was fine with that model, that she had everything she needed, that I was giving her enough." She paused. "And then a stranger in a hotel lobby showed me in about 3 hours what I had actually been withholding from her, and from myself." I didn't say anything. He let her go. "I don't know how to do this perfectly," she said. "I don't know how to be in something like this, and not occasionally retreat into the version of myself that manages everything and needs nobody. I'll probably do it. I'll probably do it and not realize I'm doing it, and you'll have to tell me." "I'll tell you," he said. "And I'm in New York and you're in Chicago, and that's a real thing that doesn't have an easy answer." "I know," he said. "I'm working on that." "So am I," she said. He looked at her. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I'm not organizing my life around being alone anymore," she said. "I'm saying I think this is worth the logistics. I'm saying—" She paused. "I'm saying I don't want you to get back on the plane tomorrow and have this be something we're still circling." He looked at her for a moment with the expression she'd seen on the park bench, the one where something in him had come out from behind the management, from behind the discipline, and was just there. "I've been in love with you," he said carefully, "since the morning you showed up at my construction fence at 6:50 in the morning to say thank you in person, when you could have had the hotel concierge pass along a note." She looked at him. "I filed it," he said. "I've been filing it for weeks." "So have I," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Can I stop filing it?" "Yes," she said. "Please." He leaned forward and kissed her, and it was exactly what it should have been. Unhurried, deliberate, the kind of thing done by two people who have been paying careful attention to each other for long enough that they already know how the other one receives things, who don't need to figure anything out because they've already been figuring it out for weeks, in coffee shops and park benches and phone calls at 4:27 on Thursday afternoons. When they stopped, she stayed close for a moment. "The girls are going to be insufferable about this," she said. He made the sound, the short, genuine, not performed laugh. "Olivia is going to say she saw it coming. Amelia is going to ask if it affects the infrastructure of the imaginary city. Does it? I imagine they'll have opinions," she said. He laughed again, really laughed this time, the version she hadn't heard before. Fuller and easier than the contained version, the version of a man who had put something heavy down and hadn't picked it back up. She listened to it and thought, I am going to hear that sound for a long time. She intended to. Monday came with the specific weight of a morning that requires two people who would rather stay to return to their respective lives. Olivia was composed about it in the way she was composed about most things. She hugged Amelia with one arm, precise and genuine, and told her that the Southern District still needed better transit density, and Amelia said she knew, and that was their goodbye, which was both economical and complete. Caleb stood in the entry with his bag. Victoria stood in front of him. 3 weeks, he said. The warehouse project site visit in New York. I'll bring Olivia if her school schedule works. I'll have Marcus set up at the hotel. Same one as Chicago. Olivia liked the lobby. She liked the columns, he said. She counted the load-bearing ones. All children who come into our orbit apparently count load-bearing columns now, Victoria said. They learn from the best, he said. She looked at him. Drive carefully, or fly carefully, whatever applies. He reached out and tucked a piece of hair back from her face. The same matter-of-fact care, the same precision applied to something small and real. I'll call tonight, he said. I know, she said. I'll answer before the second ring. Something moved through his expression. You noticed that? I notice everything, she said. I just don't always say so. He kissed her once more, brief and certain, and picked up his bag and went. She stood in the entry for a moment after the door closed. Then Amelia appeared from the kitchen, notebook and hand pencil behind her ear, with the focused expression she wore when she'd been thinking about something and had arrived at a conclusion. Mom, she said. Yes. I think Caleb is a load-bearing column, Amelia said with complete seriousness. Victoria looked at her daughter. Amelia looked back, waiting for her to process it. In what sense? Victoria said carefully. In the sense that if you took him out, Amelia said, the structure would need to be redesigned. She paused. That's what Olivia said about the decorative columns in your lobby, that if they were actually structural, you couldn't remove them without consequences. Victoria absorbed this. She said, Olivia said that about the lobby columns. On Friday, Amelia confirmed, while you and Caleb were talking. She looked at her notebook. I think she was also talking about Caleb. Victoria looked at her daughter, 7 years old, brown pigtails, one missing front tooth, 2 front teeth. Now actually, because she'd grown while Victoria was learning how to be beside things instead of above them, and felt something in her chest that had no clean name, but was closely related to the feeling of coming home to a place you didn't know you'd been away from. I think she was right, Victoria said. Amelia nodded, satisfied. I thought so, she said, and went back to the kitchen to work on the Southern District's transit infrastructure. Victoria stood in the entry for a moment longer. Then she picked up her phone and started rearranging her schedule for the next 3 weeks with the particular quiet efficiency of a woman who had decided what mattered and was making room for it. Not because she'd fixed anything, because she finally understood what she was building. 3 months after a rainy afternoon in a Chicago hotel lobby, the imaginary city had a name. Amelia announced it on a Tuesday evening in January in the kitchen of Victoria's New York apartment, while Olivia was on video call from Chicago, and both girls were arguing about the final designation with the focused, affectionate conviction of people who had been building something together long enough to feel proprietary about it. Bridgemont, Amelia said. A pause from the tablet. Then Olivia, that's too obvious. It has 7 bridges, Amelia said. It's not obvious. It's accurate. Accurate isn't the same as interesting. It is in engineering. Another pause. Fine, Olivia said. Bridgemont, but I want final approval on the transit map. You already have final approval on the transit map. I want it in writing. Amelia looked at Victoria, who was making dinner at the counter. Can you witness a verbal agreement? I can, Victoria said without looking up from the cutting board. She witnessed it, Amelia told the tablet. Okay, Olivia said, satisfied. Bridgemont. Victoria heard Caleb's voice in the background of the call. Just a word, just checking something with Olivia about dinner, and felt the specific quality of warmth that had become the most reliable thing in her life over the past 3 months. The warmth of a voice heard from the other side of 1,000 miles that still managed to land in the room. She had not expected that. She had not known to expect it. She was learning to be grateful for the things she hadn't known to expect. The Chicago office opened in February. It was not a dramatic announcement. It was a practical decision. She had the Meridian acquisition. She had 2 other properties in the pipeline. She had good reasons to be present in the market that had nothing to do with a man who knew about cable attention and load distribution and how to be beside things instead of above them. The business case was real, and she'd made it on its merits and presented it to her board as such, and they had approved it unanimously. Diane had said when Victoria told her, "The business case is airtight." "Thank you," Victoria said. "I didn't say it was the reason," Diane said. "I said it was airtight." Victoria had looked at her for a moment. The reason and the business case are not mutually exclusive. They never are with you, Diane said. You've never done a single thing in your life that wasn't both emotionally true and strategically sound. It's your most exhausting quality, and also your best one. She paused. Does he know about the office? He knows, Victoria said. What did he say? She thought about it. Caleb had been quiet for a moment when she'd told him the good kind of quiet, the filing kind, and then he'd said very simply, the West Loop warehouse project could use someone who understands Chicago's zoning history better than my current consultants. And she'd said, that sounds like a professional inquiry. And he'd said, it is, among other things. And she'd said, I'll have my office send a proposal. And he'd said, I'll review it personally. He made it professional first, she told Diane, so I could choose it on my own terms. Diane looked at her. I want to meet him, she said. You will, Victoria said. He's coming to New York in March. He's going to look at a project space in Brooklyn. And stay where? Victoria looked at her steadily. Here, she said. He's going to stay here. Diane picked up her coffee. Good, she said, for the second time, in exactly the same tone as the first, as if that one word was sufficient, and it was. The thing about building something real, as opposed to building something impressive, or something profitable, or something that looked right from the outside, was that it required a willingness to be seen in the middle of it. Not at the beginning when everything was possibility, not at the end when it was finished and could be assessed, but in the middle when the structure was up, but nothing was finished, and you could see every place it was still incomplete. Victoria had never been good at the middle. She'd always moved fast enough that the middle was brief. She'd always had enough control that the middle was contained. She'd built her career, her companies, her identity, on the principle that you minimized the middle. You planned well enough that the middle was just execution. But this, the Chicago office, the phone calls the weekends when Olivia came to New York, or when Amelia and Victoria took the train to Chicago, and Amelia spent 40 minutes explaining Bridgemont's northern residential district to Caleb's structural engineer, who listened with genuine interest and asked 3 questions that sent Amelia back to the notebook for revisions. This was not something you could minimize the middle of. This was the middle. The whole thing was the middle for a while, and she had to learn to be in it. Caleb helped. Not by managing it for her, he was very careful about that. Careful in the way of someone who understood the difference between standing beside someone and standing in front of them. But by modeling it, by letting her see what it looked like when someone was in the middle of something and not pretending they weren't. I was in the middle of things too. The warehouse project which he had taken on, which was bigger than anything he'd done before, which had the specific weight of a bet on himself that could go right or wrong, was in its complicated early phase. Things that hadn't been in the survey. Subcontractors who needed managing. A timeline that was already showing pressure points. He talked about it on the phone the way he talked about everything accurately, without drama, without asking for more than what the conversation was. But she heard the weight of it under the accuracy. She'd gotten good at hearing the thing under the thing with him. And when she heard it, she asked, "Tell me the part that's actually worrying you," she said one evening in late February, when he'd given her the project update, and something in the cadence of it had been off. A pause. "The lead subcontractor on the structural framing," he said. "He's good, he's done good work, but he's also got 3 other active projects, and I can feel him splitting his attention, and I don't know yet if it's going to be a real problem or if I'm reading it wrong." "You're not reading it wrong," she said. "You don't read things wrong." "I read Meridian Collective wrong," he said. "I thought they were a normal, difficult client. I didn't see the pattern." "You weren't looking for a pattern," she said. "You were doing your job. That's different from reading someone wrong." He was quiet. "Talk to the subcontractor," she said. "Directly. Not about the other projects, about this one, about what he needs to give it full attention. And if he can't, then you know earlier rather than later," she said. "Earlier is always better." A pause. "Yeah," he said. "You're right." "I know," she said, the short, genuine laugh. "You always know." "I know the things I know," she said. "I'm still learning the things I don't." "Same," he said. "What are you learning?" she said. I was quiet for a moment. "That I've been treating risk as something to minimize instead of something to understand," he said. "I kept the company small because small felt safer, but safe and right aren't always the same thing." He paused. "You taking on the Chicago office when the business case was real, but not the only reason that was you doing right instead of safe." "It was terrifying," she said. "I know," he said. "I could hear it." You didn't say anything. You didn't need me to say anything, he said. You needed to make the decision. I just needed to be there while you made it. She held the phone. Beside it, she said. Beside it, he confirmed. April came, and with it, the thing that neither of them had planned for, and both of them had been quietly moving toward without quite naming it as a destination. Caleb had been in New York for 4 days, the Brooklyn Project, which was real and which he was genuinely assessing, and which happened to mean 4 days in Victoria's apartment with Olivia in Amelia's room, and the drafting paper spread across the floor again, and Bridgemont entering what Amelia called its infrastructure maturity phase, which Olivia said was a pretentious way to say they were finally fixing the transit map. On the third evening after dinner, after the girls had retreated to Amelia's room with the focused intentionality of architects who have work to finish, Victoria and Caleb sat at the kitchen table with wine and the comfortable quiet of two people who had gotten very good at being in the same room. He said, "I've been looking at something." She looked at him. "The Brooklyn space." "Different space," he said. "Residential." He paused. "In Chicago, bigger than my current place, a building from the 20s that's been partially renovated. Good Bones needs work." She was very still. "It has 4 bedrooms," he said, "which is more than Olivia and I need." He said it evenly, not performing casualness, just accurately. "But the 4th bedroom has good light, and the room dimensions would work for a home office setup." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to decide anything," he said. "I'm telling you I'm looking at it because I think the middle of this is going to end eventually, and I'd like to know what we're building toward before it does." He held her gaze. "Not a demand. Not a plan I've made without you. Just a direction. So we're both looking at the same horizon." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "How's the light in the main bedroom?" Something moved through his face. "East-facing," he said. "It's good in the morning." "I'm up early," she said. "I know," he said. 6:50. She almost smiled. "That's a construction fence joke." "It's a fact," he said. "You're up at 6:50 at the latest. The light would work." She looked at her wine glass. She looked at him. She thought about the version of herself that had stood at a window in a Chicago hotel 11 months ago, unable to reach her own daughter, organized around the certainty that alone was stronger. That version of herself had been very efficient and very capable and very, very empty in a way she hadn't let herself name until a stranger sat down on a bench and talked about cables. "I need to be in New York a significant portion of the time," she said. "The company is here. My primary office has to be here." "I know," he said. "Chicago doesn't have to be primary. It just has to be real." "Real," she said. "A place we both choose," he said. "Not a compromise, a choice." She looked at him. "Tell me about the building," she said. "The bones." He told her about the building. The bones were good. The renovation had addressed the plumbing and electrical, but left the aesthetic decisions open, which he'd seen as a problem when he first looked at it, and had since recategorized as an opportunity, because an open aesthetic decision was not a deficiency. It was an invitation for two people who both had opinions to figure out what they wanted together. She asked 4 questions. He answered all of them without making them feel like a test because he knew they weren't. She asked questions because she was processing, because that was how she moved toward things, and he had learned to read the questions as motion rather than resistance. On the 4th answer, she said, "I want to see it." "When?" "Next time I'm in Chicago," she said. "The Meridian walkthrough is in 2 weeks. I could stay an extra day." He nodded. "I'll set it up." She looked at him across the table. She said, "Caleb, yeah, I want to say something directly. Always. I've spent a lot of time in my life being good at things," she said. "I've been good at business, and good at strategy, and good at managing outcomes, and not good at this." She gestured slightly between them. "Not for lack of capacity, for lack of willingness, because it required things I decided not to require of myself." She paused. "And I want you to know that what I'm doing now, looking at light in east-facing bedrooms and thinking about home offices, and whether a choice is a compromise or a direction, I'm doing that because I'm willing. Not because it's the logical next move, because I want this. I want you in my life in the full, real, built-to-last way, and I want Amelia to grow up knowing what that looks like." I was quiet for a moment. He said, "I've been building things my whole life. Structures, projects, a company, a version of being a father that worked, and I've done it well mostly, but I've been doing it the way I was trained to do difficult things alone, contained carrying the load without asking anyone to take the other end." He paused. And then you showed up at my construction fence at 6:50 in the morning, and I thought, this is a person who already knows which columns are load-bearing. This is a person who will take the other end without me having to ask. She looked at him. Was I right? He said. Yes, she said. Then I want the same thing, he said. Full, real, built to last. He held her gaze. I've been wanting it since a hotel lobby in October. She reached across the table. He took her hand. Outside New York was doing what New York did in April, noisy and bright and entirely unconcerned with the quiet, specific, permanent thing that had just been decided at a kitchen table while two 8-year-olds argued about transit infrastructure in the next room. 6 months later, Victoria stood in a community center on the near north side of Chicago and watched her daughter stand in front of a crowd of 40 people and explain a bridge. Not the imaginary city's bridge, a real one or the design of a real one, a proposal that Amelia and Olivia had developed over the past 4 months for a pedestrian bridge concept over a section of the Chicago River. They'd entered it in a junior design competition through the Chicago Architecture Foundation. They were the youngest entrants by 3 years. They had placed second. The community center presentation was the foundation's public showcase of the finalists. Amelia was presenting their design to an audience that included architects, city planners, and 3 judges who had given them their placement and were now watching the 8-year-old explain load distribution with the focused, unafraid precision of someone who had been thinking about this specific problem for 6 months. Olivia stood beside her at the display board, handling the questions about transit connections and riverbank access. They had divided the presentation with the same efficiency they applied to everything. Amelia took the structural elements, Olivia took the infrastructure. They'd practiced twice. They disagreed once during practice about the order of the sections and resolved it in 11 minutes. Victoria stood near the back of the room. Caleb stood beside her. Not 2 paces back and slightly to the left, beside her. His arm against hers, both of them watching the same thing, their daughters standing in front of a room of adults and not flinching. She's not afraid, Victoria said, quietly, just between them. No, he said. She was afraid of everything for 14 months, Victoria said. She was afraid of her own voice. I know, he said, and now she's explaining tension ratios to a city planner. She's been explaining tension ratios since October, he said. She just had a smaller audience. Victoria watched Amelia answer a question from one of the judges, something about material choice in the bridge deck with the specific, calibrated directness of someone who has thought about it and knows what she thinks and is not afraid of being heard. She did it the way Victoria used to do things before she'd learned to be afraid of what happened if you spoke and someone heard and decided it was strange. She did it the way she used to do it before the school and the notebook and the silence. She did it the way she was doing it again. Not because someone had fixed her, not because someone had managed her back to herself, because she had found people who sat beside her and talked about the things she cared about and let her care about them without making her feel like caring was a problem. A woman found her, and a man on a bench who knew about cables, and a girl who said the Southern District needed better transit density, and a mother who finally learned that being beside something was not the same as giving up control. It was a different kind of strength. The kind that held. Victoria pressed her hand briefly against Caleb's arm. He looked at her. She said, "Thank you." He looked back at the girls. "I didn't do this," he said. "You sat down on a bench," she said. "She asked me about bridges." "She asked you because you were the kind of person she could ask," Victoria said. "That's not nothing. That's everything." He was quiet for a moment. Amelia was wrapping up. She was thanking the judges with the precise, genuine courtesy that had become her signature. Not performed politeness, but the real version, the kind that came from actually meaning it. Olivia was rolling up the display materials with the efficiency of someone who had places to be. The room began to shift and move, the applause settling into conversation, and the conversation into people finding their coats. Amelia came off the small stage and walked directly to Victoria and said, "The judge from the city planning office wants to know if we'd be willing to present to his department's student outreach program." Victoria looked at her daughter, 8 years old, brown pigtails, both front teeth now grown in fully, while Victoria was learning how to stop managing the space between them into something easier than it was. "What did you tell him?" Victoria said. "I told him I'd need to check with my partner," Amelia said, "because it would have to fit Olivia's schedule too." And Olivia, She said yes, but she has opinions about the format. Obviously, Victoria said. Amelia almost smiled. The full version, the one that had been coming back piece by piece over the past year, incrementally the way things come back when they've been away long enough to become themselves again. I told him probably yes, but we needed to discuss it. That was exactly right, Victoria said. Amelia nodded, satisfied, and turned to find Olivia because there was discussing to be done. Caleb watched his daughter receive this news with a focused nod and immediately begin discussing format with Amelia, and he made the sound the short, genuine, not-performed laugh, and Victoria heard it and filed it and did not need to take it out to look at it because it was already built into the structure of things. It was already load-bearing. They walked home through the near north side, the four of them, the city doing its January thing now, cold and bright and unapologetic about both. The building, the one with the good bones and the east-facing light, was on their route. They passed it the way they passed it most days, which was to say that Amelia and Olivia always slowed slightly in front of it, because they had opinions about the facade detailing, and Victoria and Caleb always slowed with them because the slowing had become part of how they walked past it. The stonework is better than the renovation photos showed, Amelia said for approximately the fourth time. It's original, Caleb said. 1927. They didn't touch it. They were smart not to touch it, Amelia said. Some things you leave alone, Caleb agreed. Olivia looked at the door. It had a new handle. Caleb had replaced it last month when the building had formally become theirs because the old one had been loose, and he did not leave loose handles alone when he had the tools to fix them. When does the rest of the renovation start? She asked. March, he said, after the warehouse phase 2. And the kitchen, Olivia said, because Olivia had opinions about the kitchen. March, Caleb said. You'll have input. I know I'll have input, Olivia said. I want to know the timeline. March, he said again, with a specific date. March 15th, he said. Okay, she said, satisfied. Amelia was looking at the upper floor windows. The fourth floor has better proportions than I expected from the outside, she said. It's the ceiling height, Victoria said. The building was designed when they still built rooms to breathe in. Amelia looked at her. You sound like Caleb when you say things like that. Victoria glanced at him. He said, she's been spending time with a builder. It was what she'd said to him 8 months ago in a coffee shop in Chicago. He filed things. She knew he did. She did too. I have, she said. They walked on. The girls moved ahead, Olivia updating Amelia on the transit map revision she'd been considering since Tuesday, Amelia listening with the focused, evaluating attention she brought to everything, already formulating her response. Victoria and Caleb walked beside each other in the particular way they had developed, close enough to be in the same current of movement, not performing anything, just present in the same moment with the same direction. He said quietly, "She's going to present to the city planning office." "She is," Victoria said. "A year ago she couldn't talk to a stranger." "She talked to you," Victoria said. "You were a stranger." "She asked me about a bridge." "She asks people about things she cares about," Victoria said. "She always did. She just forgot she was allowed to." She watched her daughter ahead of them. She remembered. He nodded. They walked. After a while he said, "I want to ask you something." She looked at him. "I've been carrying something around for a while," he said, "and I want to put it down properly." She looked at him carefully. He stopped walking. She stopped. He reached into his coat pocket and took out something small, and he held it in his hand, and he looked at her, the way he'd looked at her from the beginning, clearly, accurately, without adding or subtracting, just seeing what was there and calling it what it was. It was a ring, simple, specific, a band with a single stone that had the quality of something chosen by someone who paid attention to what a person actually was, not what a person was supposed to want. He said, "I'm not asking you to change your life. I'm asking you to keep building it beside mine." He held her gaze. "I'm asking because I want you to know that what I feel is not something I'm filing anymore. It's something I'm certain of." He paused. "And because Olivia told me 3 weeks ago that I was taking too long and she had a design competition to focus on." Victoria looked at the ring. She looked at him. She said, "Olivia knows." "Olivia has known since December," he said. "She helped me choose it." "Amelia doesn't know," Victoria said. "No," he said. "I thought you should tell her." She looked at him for a long moment. The city was cold around them. The girls were 30 feet ahead, deep in conversation, entirely unaware that the axis of their lives was being adjusted behind them. Victoria Harrington had spent her adult life making decisions that were both emotionally true and strategically sound. Diane had said it was her most exhausting quality and also her best one. This was not a strategic decision. This was just true. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her finger with the same matter-of-fact care he brought to everything precise, unhurried, certain. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. She reached up and put her hand against his face briefly, the way she'd learned to do the things she meant simply without managing them into something more comfortable than they were. Then she called ahead, "Amelia." Amelia turned. "Come here," Victoria said. Amelia came back, Olivia behind her, both of them reading their parents' faces with the particular attentiveness of children who understand that the adults in their lives are trying to say something important. Amelia looked at Victoria's hand. She looked at Caleb. She looked at Victoria. She said very seriously, "Does this mean Bridgemont is a shared project?" Victoria looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Amelia. "It means Bridgemont is a family project," he said. Amelia thought about this with the focused precision she applied to structural problems. Then she looked at Olivia. "We need to add a 4th district," she said, "for the expanded infrastructure." Olivia said, "I already have a name for it." "What? Tell you at home," Olivia said, and she turned and kept walking because there was a direction and they were going in it and there was work to do. Amelia followed her, already talking. Victoria and Caleb stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching their daughters walk ahead into the cold, bright January air, certain of where they were going, certain of each other, arguing about the name of a district in a city that didn't exist, but was more real than most things. He took her hand. She held it. They walked. Some things you carry alone for so long that you forget what you were carrying it for. Some things you build so carefully in isolation that you forget the whole point of building is for something to last, and things built alone don't last the way things built together do. Victoria Harrington had spent years proving she needed no one. Caleb Whitmore had spent years protecting everyone while accepting nothing in return. And somewhere between a hotel lobby and a construction fence and a park bench and a kitchen table and a building with good bones and east-facing light, they had both learned the same thing, the thing their daughters had already known, or were learning or would know by the time they were old enough to need it. You don't find strength by needing nobody. You find it by finding the person who makes you stronger without making you smaller, who stands beside you because they choose to not, because they have to, who sees the load you're carrying and doesn't take it from you, but puts their shoulder against it and helps you carry it the rest of the way. Two people who had each built something real and good and incomplete. Two daughters who had already figured out what their parents were still learning. One city they were building together, and the whole rest of their lives to build it right.